So thank you very much for the presentation. It's actually a route that deals with the 99% of the article that we have. So good afternoon, everybody. As Jan said, my name is Michele Migliori. I am originally from Florence in Italy, but I'm currently based in Budapest, where I recently graduated from the Slovenian University in a master's degree in ethnic and minority policy. And before moving to Hungary 2 years ago, I lived in Gorizia for 3 years, where I studied my bachelor's degree and where I also volunteered for the Friends of Israel Association. That is an association that looks after the Jewish heritage of the city, including also the Jewish cemetery of Rožna Dolina. And that's why I decided to do this research and to present about this topic. The Jewish cemetery of Rožna Dolina, it's a very important and valuable transnational monument between Italy and Slovenia. And I decided to describe this presentation and this topic under a different perspective. There is the geographical context between the East and the West, that's represented by the cemetery, and the multicultural dimension of the cemetery itself, that being the cemetery the mirror of the society and the community it served for more than 100 years, and being as such a transnational monument. The very first cemetery of Gorizia was located in the area of the ghetto of the city that is pointed here with the red dot. We don't know exactly the location of this cemetery, but we know from a historical source from the 17th century that was close to the Corno stream. There is a small stream that now lies underground. And then in the 1980s, during the renovation work of the area, they found out some bones underground that were probably belonging to the Jewish cemetery. And then in the early 1980s, when the synagogue was restored, and when there were the renovation works of the synagogue, the rabbi from Trieste forbid to excavate in the area of the synagogue, because there was supposed to be another Jewish cemetery close to a prayer room in the site of the synagogue before the synagogue was constructed in 1756. Then the Jewish community of Gorizia decided to move the cemetery to another area, that is the area of Rožna Dolina, nowadays, before was known as Val di Rose or Rosenthal, a bit farther than the actual location that is pointed out here with the blue dot. And then this cemetery served from the 17th century until the second decade of the 19th century. And then they decided, the Jewish community, to establish a new cemetery closer to the city center so that it was easier to do the funerals, so closer to the synagogue, and it was located in the area where it was today. And here from this map from Google Maps, you can see this gray line that cut in the middle. The photo, the screenshot, is actually the border between Italy and Slovenia. And one of the first documents, historical documents about the cemetery, is the October 1876 list of the buried in the Jewish cemetery of Gorizia. And now this document, that is composed by 24 pages, is stored in the archive of the Jewish community of Trieste. And it's very important and it's very valuable under many point of views, this list. But in the aim of my research, it's very important because it's possible to see the multicultural dimension of the city, of the cemetery, and the composition of the Jewish community. From this list, it's possible to see that there are Jews buried in the cemetery from all around the Austrian Empire, and then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from Hungary, also from small villages from Hungary, from Poland and Galicia, from Austria, from nowadays Croatia, from nowadays Ukraine, and also outside the the empire, from Italy, from Berlin, so in Germany, and then from Greece and Macedonia. And this is particularly interesting because the fact that there were buried Jews from Macedonia and Greece can let us think about the diverse, also inside the Jewish world, the diverse origin of Jews here, there buried. And this can be also reflected by the style of some tombstones. There, the photo I decided to insert there is a tombstone in the cemetery that, according to the landscape architect, Yugoslavian landscape architect Dusan Ogrin, remembers the tombstone, the typical tombstone of men in Muslim cemeteries, while according to local historians, it remembers the typical tombstone of Jewish men in Sephardi cemeteries. And ever from the list, it's possible to see also, and how was also pointed out by the former president of the Jewish community of Gorizia, also the Arabic origins of some of the people there buried. And in 1915, coming to the last century, in 1950 Italy entered officially the war, and Gorizia was in the middle of one of the most bloody battles, the 12 battles of the Isonzo, and also the cemetery was actually in the middle of the war itself. From the maps from the Austro-Hungarian army, it's possible to see the cemetery lying in the middle between the Austrian army and the Italian army. And actually, during the war, the ceremonial hall of the cemetery was totally destroyed and then rebuilt after in 1928. And major damages also inside the cemetery occurred during the war. But the cemetery, also in the war, also after the war, when the war ended in 1918 and Gorizia became officially part of the Italian kingdom, the cemetery didn't stop to be a symbol of peace also after the war. Because in the cemetery are buried Italian soldiers from the Jewish community of Gorizia. Gorizia was in Austria at that time, but many young members of the Jewish community decided to flee to Italy to enlist themselves in the army and then to fight during the war. But at the same time are buried in the cemetery members of the Austro-Hungarian Empire army, and are four actually. Their tombstones are easily foundable, reachable in the cemetery, because usually even before the war, the poorest members, together with the foreigners and the suicidal, their tombstones were posed close to the walls of the cemetery, so are easily foundable, and their style remembers the style of army tombstones. And these four soldiers were from different parts of the empire. One was from Lemberg, today's Lviv in Ukraine, two were from Dalmatia, in nowadays Croatia, and this one was from a soldier from Bohemia, and who was first buried in Kjapovan, or now is Čepovan in Slovenia, and then in 1929, when the military cemetery was dismantled, he was reburied in the cemetery. And in the cemetery is also buried Carolina Luzzatto, who is one of the most prominent members of the Jewish community of Gorizia, who was a pro-Italian activist, a poetess, and the first woman to run a journal in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And after the war, in the interwar period, the Jewish community restarted this activity. The synagogue was restored after 3 years of works, with a great celebration run by the Rabbi Friedenthal, who was from Hungary. And the community restarted its activities that during the war were run only by the shamash of the synagogue, who was Ben-Zion Fink, an immigrant from Poland who decided to stay under the bombs in Gorizia and to take care about the synagogue, and also of the Jewish cemetery. He was the person in charge of the people to be buried in the cemetery. But one of the most important movements that helped the community to restart its activities was the Zionist group of Gorizia, called Hatikva, that was established in the early 1920s by Oscar Murpurgo, who was the president of the community, but then led by Professor Angelo Daffano, who was at the middle of this photo from the 1920s. The aim of this group was to teach to the youngsters of the community to the Jewish rituals and the Jewish life, and to let them members and part of the community. And again, the cemetery is again at the center also of this story, because in the 1930s, this group, these members, asked the board of the Jewish community to give them part of the land close to the cemetery, that at that time was property of the Jewish community, to build there an hashkara, to help to the members of the group to know the farming activities, to then performing the aliyah. Then this plan didn't succeed because of the war, because of the racial laws, and they hadn't time to succeed with this plan. And in 1932 we have the list of the buried in the Jewish cemetery, and at that time were around 878 tombstones in the cemetery. And then with the war, the community almost vanished. 78 people from the Jewish community of Gorizia were deported. Only 2 returned to the city, and the community tried with these activities to go on, especially thanks at the beginning to the American army that was deployed in Gorizia. But then when in 1947 the American army left Gorizia, the community vanished. Until then, in 1969, where they dissolved officially. And in 1947, the Jewish cemetery of Rosna Dolina became officially part of the Yugoslavian Republic. And while the synagogue lied at the other part of the city, and the community couldn't continue to use the Jewish cemetery, and from that time on, they started to use another cemetery that is in Gradiska di Zonzo, is 15 kilometers southwest from Gorizia, and the first funeral was there, celebrated in 1954. And then, after 30 years of abandonment of the cemetery, in 1977, the Jewish community of Trieste, that from the dissolution of the community, was the legal representative of the Jewish community of Gorizia, and the municipality of Nova Gorica found an agreement in which the Jewish community gave to the municipality of Nova Gorica the ceremonial hall that then was renewed in the 1980s because it was ruined, in exchange of the guarantee that the municipality of Nova Gorica would take care of the maintenance of the cemetery. And then the ceremonial hall was supposed to be used only for social-cultural activities. However, the municipality never really complied with such points of the contract. The cemetery in the last years was used as a casino before, then as a bar, and then last time I visited Gorica, but then maybe it's not like this anymore. It was in November of last year. It was gave to actually a local association that take care of now about the ceremonial hall. And in 1985, the ceremonial hall was listed as a cultural monument of local interest, but this didn't really help the cemetery itself to be cared and maintained as it would have been. And then in 1991, the war almost touched again the cemetery. It didn't really touch the cemetery, but at 500 meters of distance from the cemetery, here you can see this photo that was taken in June 1991 in the border station of Gorizia, of Rosna Dolina. The Slovenian Territorial Army and the Yugoslavian People's Army confronted exactly in this place at 500 meters of distance and almost touched again the cemetery. Then there's an urban legend that has not been proven by historiography, of course, but in Gorizia there's someone who says that also the cemetery staged some battles during the war. This hasn't been proven, but it gives the idea of the proximity between the cemetery and the actual place where the war was, part of the battles of the 10 Days War happened. And in 2004, Slovenia joined officially the European Union. In 2007, the Treaty of Schengen was fully implemented, and From that time on, it's possible to cross the border without even showing a passport or an ID card. And from that time, it opened again to the city and to Italy and also to Slovenia. From that time on, it raised interest in the people and local people from the city to see and to raise the interest in the confront of this place. And in 2010, it was the first renovation of the cemetery, which was not at all a full-scale renovation. It was run because of the 100th anniversary of the death of Carlo Michele, that was a prominent member of the Jewish community of Gorizia, a famous philosopher. And for this reason, his tombstones, the tombstones of his family members, and of other few tombstones in the cemetery were renovated. A new gate was made, a new multilingual signet telling the history of the community and of the most important and most prominent people who heard their buried was made there. A new pavimentation and also a new sink inside the cemetery on the right. And then in 2016 was announced a new renovation project that will be run by the Foundation for Jewish Heritage in Italy, but will be presented by Andrea. I won't say a word about that, you never know. And finally, what's next? The Jewish cemetery of Gorizia, as I hope I showed in this brief presentation, is a real symbol of it's a real symbol. It's a real transport and transnational symbol, a multicultural symbol. There are buried the most prominent people that made Gorizia great, but also average people that with their life, with their activities, made Gorizia as a life, a real and a living city. And this is a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity because Gorizia and Nova Gorica are officially candidates for the European Days, the European Capital of the Culture 2025. It's a great opportunity because Slovenia will host together with Germany this prize, this moment, and I think that this can be the occasion to really put the cemetery of Rosna Dolina in a route that is a real itinerary of Jewish itinerary of the city, because now there are a lot of itineraries online, but no itineraries that are really in the touristic routes of the city. And to give back to this cemetery the greatness that it's worth in all the kind of point of views. And thank you very much for your attention. And who's interested in the paper and everything, you can contact me whenever you want.